Hello again and welcome to In Taiwan We Speak, your audio guide to Taiwan's mind-blowing linguistic diversity. I am Alexander Shin, and this is the last part of our conversation with Tuhi Martukaw, or Jocelyn Hongjian Ting Hui, an indigenous rights activist from the Pinu-Umayan Nation, as well as a journalist and a TV presenter. Tuhi, back in 2013, you founded the Lima Taiwan Indigenous Youth Working Group, and one of the declared missions of it was to unite youth, indigenous youth coming from different nations, to work together on indigenous rights and indigenous people's affairs, basically. Why did you decide to go global?
Well, it's because of my own experiences. Actually, as I mentioned that in the previous episode, that I grew up in Taipei. And for when I was younger, the life in Taipei and also the life in the community is like a parallel world, you know. Like, I know my root, I know my indigenous identity, I have that. But when I was in Taipei, I didn't really like to be known as an indigenous because all this stereotype, and also no matter what kind of effort I had, everything goes to the root actually. Like people will have this label on me. But when I was back in the community, people will say, "Oh, she's a mix. She lived in Taipei. She is not part of the community." So that's what I had in my childhood. Very conflicting sometimes. But then I started to really be enlightened and also to really reconstruct my indigenous identity. That was because of my experiences abroad. I was, the first time I went to United Nations when I was 21, and I went to this Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. That was a shock for me, like a total shock, because I studied in diplomacy, so I kind of knew the system. And of course, with all this international instrument, all this covenant, all these things, I do have a basic idea about that. And also with English, I was quite confident that I can understand what people were talking. But when I was there, I realized that I was really literally like an idiot. I didn't know what's going on. And I understand what they are talking about word by word. But when I put all the concepts together, I couldn't really understand what's going on because I have no idea about my own indigenous history, the process of Taiwan. That's how we go through all this movement. And but I can tell people very clearly about the history between Taiwan and China. Why we are Republic of China and why they are People's Republic of China, and all the differences on all these things. So it's quite sarcastic that I can tell in details of other people's history, but I cannot really tell my own story. So that's a very, very big shock for me. And starting from that, I started to go back to United Nations every year and to learn about all these ideas and knowledge from all these people from different countries, from different peoples. They bring their knowledge, they bring their cultures to United Nations. So it's a very meaningful process for me to reconstruct my identity. After several years, I realized that if I want to really be more effective, to be part of the process, the international process, and also to be able to bring more of our issues of Taiwan to United Nations, then I have to have a team. And this team it's not just like I gather people who can speak English and then we go to United Nations. No, we cannot just do that. We have to do a lot of work together. So I started to invite people to join workshops or at least study session. We read articles, we discuss with different backgrounds, we also debate. And then we found this common place of our ideas. And then we bring that, and also we collect different issues from different indigenous communities. And then we brought all this to the United Nations. And again, with what we've learned from United Nations, we brought them back to Taiwan to do different workshops within indigenous communities or to go to different universities. And again, to collect more indigenous youth, the ideas of indigenous youth. Again, next year, go back to United Nations. So that's why I say that we try to, connect indigenous youth from different continents, from different culture and nations. So, and this is a way for us to be even stronger when we are back to our community, because we do know that we are not alone. And we do know that our experiences, our challenges, and also our opportunities, it's not only about us in Taiwan, but also about the indigenous peoples around the world.
Within this global community, within United Nations frameworks, are Taiwanese youth welcome?
It's a tricky question. I would say in general, for a while, I have experiences and also I do internship within the United Nations as well. We are welcomed. It's just we have difficulties, of course, because like, for example, for me, once I was in Geneva and I wanted to attend another indigenous conference. And when I hand in my Taiwanese passport to get the ground pass, this person, he literally really like threw my passport on the table and told me that this country doesn't exist. Your country is not a country. Taiwan is not a valid ID. Taiwan is not a eligible state. And that was really harmful for me. It's really like, yeah, I got really depressed that day. So I went to Geneva Lake and then swim. And then the other day, the second day, I went back again. And then that was another person who was checking my ID. Then he gave me the ground pass to enter United Nations. So it's something.
So it's not a rule.
It's a rule, but I will say that people working in United Nations, they know what's going on.
Right.
It's politics. So if they can, I would say they try to be more friendly to us. But of course, every time when we went to United Nations, we will have some bodyguards that we didn't really want them to follow us, but they do follow us. And I was also checked if, for example, if I'm going to give a speech or if I'm going to participate in any kind of seminar, they will come and ask what I would share about, and they will check our flyers to see if they put Taiwan on it. But it's okay if they just put Bin Wayan. So
right. You can put your community's name, but you cannot put Taiwan on
no,
it.
we cannot put Taiwan. And also, like publicly during the session, the formal session, we cannot mention Taiwan either. But like, for example, like the chair of the conference or like people who are giving the floor to representatives, I would say they are quite friendly. They will see that because we have to submit the statement and also who is going to present the names to the secretary first. And if they see it's me going to deliver the statement, they would be like quite friendly to us. So yeah, it's a tricky question, but still I will say that is also a way for people to realize the reality we're facing. It's a very good way to really experience what is. We see all this confrontation on TV, on news, but it's really the reality we have.
Being indigenous and being a Taiwanese in this world.
Yeah.
In one of your interviews, you mentioned that you are not fluent in Pinu Mayan, and it was several years ago. What has your relationship with your ancestral language been throughout your life?
Well, I'm still not really good at that. This is something that I'm quite embarrassed about because actually my mother, she is an indigenous language teacher. So I always say that I'm her worst student. But I will say that, of course, when I was younger, we in Taiwan, we have this system that if we pass through this language examination, we got this certificate, we can have extra points to our entrance exam to, I think, also high school and also to university. So, of course, when I was younger, I was kind of forced or encouraged to learn the Pinoy language, and also I passed the exam. But then I have to say it's really not in my daily life. But that doesn't mean that indigenous tradition is not in my daily life, because, when I, ever since I was a kid, we do have a lot of small rituals in our daily life that is very indigenous, and we still carry that. It's just, with language, it's something you have to use. But my daily life, I'm not really, using it a lot. But I will say that it might be very difficult for me to really catch up with this ability to talk in my language fluently. But what I can do is to make it more possible for the younger generation to get in touch with our language. That's also the reason why we started all these different projects we have in the community. For example, this one project we had, the very first one, is about community building. And within that project, we do a lot of activities, a lot of research with our elders regarding our traditional ceremonies, regarding our legend, our history of relocation, moving around. And in this process, we learn different terms. Because, just like English and Chinese, we cannot really literally like word by word to translate. That's the same thing because one language is one worldview. It's very different. So with that project, we can have this opportunity for the young person who is in charge of that project to really immerse in that environment, to learn the language, to learn the knowledge behind the language. And then we have this project. It's like daily daycare for the elders. And so with this daily daycare with the elders will gather around every morning during weekdays. And nowadays we have 4 caretakers, all from our community. They are all young. They got the time to spend with all the elders and with their interaction, with their activities together. Of course, they learn the language. And also, we rebuild this trust between different generations. So this all are very important process for us. So for me, it's very difficult for me to learn a new language. Well, not really a new language, but another language now. But still, a bit by a bit, we can have more opportunities for more people to be in the language.
You mentioned earlier that in your childhood, there was a lot of discrimination and negativity associated with being Indigenous person, especially in Taipei. In your opinion, for the younger generation now, is it easier to be proudly Indigenous?
Wow. I'm not so sure.
So it's not a clear yes.
I would say that it's very different because in the past, all this kind of discrimination will be very direct. It will be in a way that people will immediately know it's a discrimination. But nowadays, it's more hidden. It's like wrapped in a sugar coat or something like that. For example, when people see me, they will first say, "Oh, you're Indigenous, then you're good at singing." It sounds like a compliment, right? Like, "Oh, we envy you. You are good at singing." But first, it's a stereotype. Second, I'm not good at singing. Does that mean I'm not Indigenous enough?
Right.
And then also when people say, "Oh, you are Indigenous and you work in TV, so you must work in Indigenous TV." It's not really like a discrimination or something like that, but it's a way how people are very limited to imagine how Indigenous peoples nowadays as a profession to work in different careers. They will say, "Oh, you are Indigenous, so you will have to work in directly Indigenous related work." Or people will see me as, like, I have my traditional name, but with my ID card, it's still my Han Chinese name. Then people will say, "Oh, you say you're Indigenous, but why you are not using your Indigenous name? You don't really have strong enough identity. That's why you don't use your own name." But as I introduced already earlier in the previous episode, all the names I have are very meaningful for me. And which name I go by on my ID card, it doesn't really directly reflect how I identify myself.
Doesn't represent the whole of you.
Yeah. All these kind of things, it's quite hidden, but it still reveal this not enough knowledge or understanding or respect of this society toward Indigenous peoples. And what I'm very worried about is that a lot of times people don't realize they are discriminative, or they don't realize what they are talking about, or their attitude is actually not good. And so that's also why I decided to work in non-Indigenous TV. I work in a mainstream TV station because I want to remind people about that. That first, I use my Indigenous name in my TV program when I'm presenting, and also I greet people, I greet the audience, and also say goodbye to the audience with my language to remind the audience that we are everywhere.
We're just beyond labels.
Yeah, we are not only in the Indigenous TV, we are everywhere. And we have our expertise in different careers, in different areas. And also what I'm very mindful about is when I am broadcasting, if I'm talking about like a car accident, I would not really emphasize, for example, the age of the driver or the gender of the driver, because if we watch all this news on TV saying that, oh, there's a car accident and the driver is a female, then we will have this linkage or this idea that, oh, female drivers are not good at driving. Or if we look at like a criminal event, then we will emphasize that the criminal is, I don't know, raised by grandparents or is from rural area or whatsoever, or with indigenous background, or with it's a second generation of immigrant, then people will have this idea, this different kind of labels. So this is something I'm very careful about. If it's not necessary, I don't really have to tell people about the age, about the gender, about ethnicity, about the social status of all these people. So yeah, I would say that this is something that I try to work on, and also that's also why I cannot really definitely say yes or no to the question at first, because I'm not so sure about the younger generation, especially now I have like the niece and nephews within the family. And when I look at them, I'm very worried.
Right.
But also, it's also remind me that I have to work more. And also, it's important for us to communicate more with non-Indigenous society to provide opportunity and space for them to get to know about this.
And speaking about this, the language speaking space, we've mentioned already that your community is quite small, right? What is the linguistic situation now with the Pinu-Yumayan language?
I'm not so sure about other communities, but for me, like the Gasapagan community, the people who can very fluently speak the language, like to have conversation, of course, for the elders above 70s, and for the generation around 60s, they can communicate, but not really like in depth, like with the terms they use. And for younger one, like my age, 30, 40, we are more likely like some sentences or some vocabularies. But the younger ones, around 20s or even younger, the teenagers, I would say they are better than us. Yeah, because, as I mentioned, all this project we have in the community, and also nowadays, I would say that because all this effort that we had put in before, like 10, 20 years ago, also with our older brothers and sisters, we do have a better environment for the younger people to really have stronger identity as Indigenous or as Pinu-Mayan. Then that make it easier for them to embrace the language. Because, when I was younger, like when my grandparents, they were still in the world, and also my mom, they were saying that when I was little, because I actually grew up with my grandparents until I was 3. So before I turned 3 or before I moved to Taipei, I do have the vocabulary and ability to talk to my grandparents in Pinu-Mayan language. But then after I moved to Taipei, I lost it. So that's the same thing with the younger generation, because if they grow up in the family, people still speak the language, then they will have this idea, and also they will have this ability.
Speaking specifically about the Pinu-Yumayan language, I have to mention that, well, from the research that I have done, that it's a very unique language, right? It has several dialects within it, but it's also very different in that it's a separate language group. It's very distinct from languages that are nearby, like Amis or Pangsa, Rukai, Bunun, and Paiwan. And if you could teach our audience one word or a phrase from Pinoy Umayan that you think is useful, what would that be?
Of course, to greet people, we say inabayan. And then if we want to thank people, we will say layuan. That's the easier way. Yeah, layuan.
Laiwan.
Yeah, layuan. But if you want to say it more in a more comprehensive way, it's layuan semangalan.
I want to attempt that one. Laiwan.
Semangalan.
Oh, that's
The nose.
the nasal sound.
Yeah.
Semangalan.
Yeah, semangalan. Yeah.
Laiwan semangalan.
Yeah. Oh, very good.
Okay.
So I know this program will be broadcast to a broader audience. So I would really love to invite all the people who are listening to the episodes to to try to get to know more about indigenous peoples. Nowadays we have internet, we have a lot of different social programs or projects, and also on different social medias that we have a lot of channels to get to know about indigenous peoples. So I really want to invite all of you to do that. And if you have questions, welcome to message us, because I know it's quite difficult to learn different culture or different ideas, concepts about different peoples, but it's okay to ask questions. Yeah.
It's okay to ask questions. That is the message and the call to action from our today's guest, Tuhi Martukaw, who is an Indigenous rights activist and journalist. So I have to say Laiwan semangalan to you, Tuhi, for joining us here today. And thank you everyone for being with us. If you enjoyed our series on Pinoy Umayan language and its speaking community, then please give us some boost on social media and don't forget to recommend this program to others. And of course, do come back next week for another one of Taiwan's fascinating languages. Once again, this was In Taiwan We Speak. I am Oleg, and see you next week.